I'm sure we could all tell some pretty hilarious stories, or maybe some sad ones. Maybe that family member that no one talks to. That family member who's difficult. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? The family member that when you're together, they spend the whole time talking about themselves until just as they're about ready to leave, they say something like, "Oh, how are you doing?" And by that time, you're so exhausted from their nonstop talking about themselves that you just simply say, "Oh, I'm fine, I'm good, seriously," and you want to get out of there. Or what about the family member that asks for money yet again, but this time they say they have a clear plan for paying it back? And you just know that when you give that money, even though they call it a loan, it's not a loan. You have to give that money away with no expectation that it's coming back. We all have family drama. So far, I've talked about those other people in the family, right? They're the other ones that are making the drama. But is it ever us? Is it possible that maybe there are some family drama magnets right here in this room? Can't be, right? Can't be one of us. Well, highly likely it just might be. It can be so difficult, however, to see ourselves that way. It can be very humbling and require loads of healthy self-awareness to admit it publicly, yeah, that drama was my fault. What can be worse, I think, is when we actually are the drama magnet and everybody else in the family sees it and knows it and we simply can't see it. How can that be? How can someone be so obviously one way to the point where everybody else in their lives sees it and they can't? Michelle says that I'm a heavy breather. It does not seem to me that I'm a heavy breather. I truly cannot hear it, sense it. My impression of myself is that I'm a quiet breather. Maybe you've got something like that in your life. Are there ways that you might be responsible for pumping up the family drama? Well, we're nearing the end of the life of David. We've been studying David, King David, in the Old Testament for many months now. And as we've seen, David is no stranger to drama. Much of it has been imposed on him by other people. But sometimes he pumped up the drama himself by his own choices, didn't he? Today and next week, we're going to learn about more drama in David's life. This week it's going to focus on family drama. Next week it'll focus on friends drama. So turn with me to 2 Samuel chapter 9. If you're reading one of those Bibles in the pew, it's page 246. In 2 Samuel chapter 9, life for David has finally settled down. God has given David victory over his enemies. And yet, have you ever noticed that peace is sometimes the very thing that leads to drama? Have you ever experienced that in your family or maybe in your marriage? When you have a common enemy, it is amazing how unified you can be. Because together, you and your spouse are dealing with that drama, that problem, that person. But when the drama is dealt with, when the enemy is no more, you're just left with each other. And then what happens? You start fighting with each other. You remember the things that bothered you about that person. Before, you didn't even think about them because you were focused on the common enemy. But now that it's just the two of you, you start to get bothered again by how the person breathes too heavy. Or how they chew their food. Or the one way they say that word that makes your skin crawl. And you might think to yourself, my goodness, I think we need a new enemy. Have you ever been there? Might be cynical, but it's real. David's enemies are vanquished. And while that sounds like very good news, can a warrior king ever truly settle down? Maybe when he doesn't have any battles with his enemies, the warrior king will start picking fights at home. Some people just can't stop themselves from fighting, right? They'll create battles out of thin air where there wasn't any before. How about David? Look at 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 1. David asked, "Is there anyone left in the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" That doesn't sound like picking a fight, because it's not. David settles down, and what does he do? He remembers the covenant that he made with his best friend, Jonathan. Now, years before, Jonathan had passed away in battle. Jonathan was the previous king, King Saul. He was King Saul's son and David's best friend. In 1 Samuel chapter 20, you might remember this. David and Jonathan made a covenant with one another. Jonathan said to David, "Do not ever cut off your kindness from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth." And Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord is witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever.'" So even though decades have passed since that day when they made that covenant, David remembers the covenant and he keeps his word to Jonathan. The warrior king doesn't want to fight. He wants to bless the descendants of Saul's family, which were Jonathan's descendants, because he remembers the covenant and he loves and respects his friend. Now, I want us to observe David very closely in this chapter, because I think we're going to see how he serves for us as a wonderful model about how to handle drama. Look what David does as we continue reading. Now, there was a servant of Saul's household named Ziba. They summoned him to appear before David. And the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" "At your service," he replied. The king asked, "Is there no one still alive from the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness?" Ziba answered the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan. He is lame in both feet." "Where is he?" the king asked. Ziba answered, "He is at the house of Machir, son of Ammiel in Lo-Debar." So King David had him brought from Lo-Debar, from the house of Machir, son of Ammiel. When Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honor. David said, "Mephibosheth." "At your service," he replied. "Don't be afraid," David said to him, "for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table." Mephibosheth bowed down and said, "What is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me?" Then the king summoned Ziba, Saul's steward, and said to him, "I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him and bring in the crops, so that your master's grandson may be provided for. And Mephibosheth, grandson of your master, will always eat at my table." Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, "Your servant will do whatever my lord the king commands his servant to do." So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son named Micah, and all the members of Ziba's household were servants of Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table. He was lame in both feet. Do you see what David does there? He is extravagantly generous and kind to a person who would have been his natural enemy. You may think, why enemy? Mephibosheth is King Saul's heir. If David wanted to, he could have had Mephibosheth killed to make sure that he would have had no claim to the throne. In some ancient cultures, kings would do that kind of purge to make sure that no one could try to usurp the throne. Sometimes they would even have members of their own extended family killed to preserve the lineage that went directly through their children. You imagine that kind of a purge in a family? That's the epitome of family drama. But David does the opposite. He shows kindness. He shows lavish generosity to not only Mephibosheth, but also to the servant, Ziba, and his family. David's action to give Mephibosheth a place at the king's table is just lavish generosity and kindness. Overnight, that meant Mephibosheth became wealthy and powerful. Do you see what David is doing? Where there could have been family drama, he's decreasing the possibility of it. People of God actively decrease the drama. We don't go looking for drama. Even if we find drama interesting, and it is very interesting, we work hard not to start it. We work hard not to fixate on it. We work hard not to gossip about it or pump up the drama. David decreases the drama by looking for opportunities to be kind. David decreases the drama by being sacrificially generous. And this is how we see that David the warrior king is a man after God's own heart. But there's more to the story. Scan ahead to the next few chapters. Now, we've already covered chapters 10, 11, and 12. And so let me just remind you what happens in chapters 10, 11, and 12. In chapter 10, David battles with a group of people called the Ammonites. And then in chapter 11, when he was supposed to be finishing that war with the Ammonites, he's actually at home, now pumping up the drama. He's lusting after this woman, Bathsheba, committing adultery against her, killing her husband. And then in chapter 12, God sends the prophet Nathan to confront David. And look what God says to David in 2 Samuel chapter 12, starting in the middle of verse 7. God says, I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your master's house to you, and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you all Israel and Judah. And if all this had been too little, I would have given you even more. Why do you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now, therefore, the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own. This is what the Lord says. Out of your own household I am going to bring calamity on you. Before your very eyes I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you, and he will sleep with your wives in broad daylight. You did it in secret, but I will do this thing in broad daylight before all Israel. Talk about drama. God is basically saying, David, I delivered you from massive drama in your life. Remember how Saul was chasing you, trying to kill you all those years? I gave you victory and peace and prosperity. Now you, David, you're the source of the drama. You committed adultery, lying, murder. So much awful drama. Now, David, there will be drama in your house for the rest of your life, and it will be public to all. Now, God does forgive David of his sin, but he's saying there will be consequences. Now, turn to 2 Samuel chapter 13 and get ready for the drama. In the course of time, we read at verse 1, Amnon, firstborn son of David, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, thirdborn son of David. You say, wait a minute. A brother fell in love with his sister. Yes, they were half siblings, different moms. And it doesn't excuse this in the least. This is a wrong situation. It's condemned in the Mosaic Law. Leviticus 18, verse 9, we read, "Do not have sexual relations with your sister, either your father's daughter or your mother's daughter, whether she was born in the same home or elsewhere. Do not have sexual relations with the daughter of your father's wife." She's born to your father. She is your sister. And yet what happened? We continue reading. Amnon became so obsessed with his sister Tamar that he made himself ill. She was a virgin, and it seemed impossible for him to do anything with her. Now Amnon had an advisor named Jonadab, son of Shimeah, David's brother. Jonadab was a very shrewd man. So what we see is that this Amnon, firstborn son of David, he is just sick with lust about his half-sister. And so Amnon doesn't know what to do. He goes to his cousin, Jonadab. This will turn out to be a very bad move, because Jonadab is a schemer. He's not to be trusted for wise advice. Jonadab is the kind of person who pumps up the drama. He seems like he is all about the drama. He wants to get in there, and he wants to be involved. Jonadab asked Amnon, as we keep reading, "Why do you, the king's son, look so haggard morning after morning? Won't you tell me?" Amnon said to him, "I'm in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." So Jonadab responded, "Go to bed. Pretend to be ill. When your father comes to see you, say to him, 'I would like my sister Tamar to come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare the food in my sight, so I may watch her and then eat it from her hand.'" Talk about pumping up the drama. This Jonadab, he's a master drama inflator. He is not someone who Amnon should be going to for help. Amnon needs someone to tell him, "Stop it. You cannot have your half-sister. You need to repent of your lust and make a change. You are sinning." That would be deflating the drama. That would be doing the right thing, the God-honoring thing. But instead, Jonadab is all about this drama. What will Amnon do? It says, as we keep reading, "So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. When the king came to see him, Amnon said to him, 'I would like my sister Tamar to come and make some special bread in my sight, so I may eat it from her hand.' David sent word to Tamar at the palace, 'Go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare some food for him.'" Now let me stop there. Does anyone else think this is a really strange situation? It's just odd. Jonadab and Amnon seem to have come up with a super sketchy idea here. It's so sketchy, it makes me wonder, why doesn't David see anything weird about this? How in the world is he going along with this? We don't know. Maybe he just thinks his son is sick and his son could be encouraged by his sister. Maybe he thinks it's innocent. It is the furthest thing from innocent. Here's what happens. So Tamar went to the house of her brother Amnon, who was lying down. She took some dough, kneaded it, made the bread in his sight, and baked it. Then she took the pan and served him the bread, but he refused to eat. "Send everyone out of here," Amnon said. So everyone left him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food here, into my bedroom, so I may eat from your hand." Tamar took the bread she had prepared and brought it to her brother Amnon in his bedroom. But when she took it to him to eat, he grabbed her and said, "Come to bed with me, my sister." "No, my brother," she said to him, "don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing. What about me? Where could I get rid of my disgrace? And what about you? You would be like one of the wicked fools in Israel. Please speak to the king. He will not keep me from being married to you." Wow. Could she even be right? Marriage between half-siblings? Now, in our eyes, we would think, no way. Well, both Amnon and Tamar should have been thinking no way as well. In Leviticus, in the law, chapter 20, verse 17, it clearly states, if a man marries his sister, the daughter of either his father or his mother, and they have sexual relations, it is a disgrace. They are to be publicly removed from their people. He has dishonored his sister, and he will be held responsible. So why would Tamar propose marriage then in this situation? I suspect she's just desperate in this moment, shocked, and trying to get out of it as quickly and by any means possible. Her insanely lustful brother is forcing his way on her. And perhaps Tamar knows David would never go for a marriage because it is against the Mosaic law, and that's her out, her way to get free from her brother's clutches. She is trying to get out of there by any means possible. What we see again in this story, like we did in the story of David and Bathsheba, is the precarious position of women in society. They served the men. They were often dominated by the men, and Tamar knows this. She knows she has very little leverage in this situation. So she makes a desperate plea for marriage. Does it work? Look at verse 14. But Amnon refused to listen to her, and since he was stronger than she, he raped her. It's horrible. It's awful. And it just keeps getting worse. Did you ever long for something for a really, really long time and you just can't have it? And over time, your longing grows. You want it so bad. Could be a new job, could be a new car. Maybe you're excited about a vacation or a new movie coming out. Could be a relationship. And then finally, you get it. Maybe you have worked really, really hard for this. You've saved up. Or maybe you've been praying for this for many, many months and years, and you get the answer to your prayer. You get what you want, and surprise, surprise, it doesn't turn out to be as wonderful as you thought. You ever had that happen before? You get the new vehicle, and it's cool for like about a month, and then you realize, oh, it's just a vehicle. You get a new phone, and you're like, I got my new phone, I've been waiting for this, I've been using this old phone for 5 years, and then you realize it's just a new phone. The disappointment sets in. You've built something up in your heart and mind so much that frankly, it can become impossible to meet that high level of expectation. In Amnon's case, what he wanted so badly, his sister, required him to act selfishly, sinfully, deeply hurtfully against his sister. And when he finally does it, something snaps inside of him. Maybe it's the guilt that smacks him. Maybe it's the shame of realizing what he did. Maybe it's the fear that, oh shoot, if this gets out, my reputation as the firstborn son, my possibility of being the next king, my everything has just been ruined. Look at verse 15. And this is what comes out of Amnon. It's not love. It's not let's get married. It says Amnon hated her with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he had loved her. Amnon said to her, "Get up and get out." "No," she said to him, "sending me away would be a greater wrong than what you've already done to me." But he refused to listen to her. He called his personal servant and said, "Get this woman out of my sight and bolt the door after her." So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. She was wearing an ornate robe, for this was the kind of garment the virgin daughters of the king wore. Amnon is super selfish and dishonorable. Not only does he rape his half-sister, he then kicks her out. In the ancient Jewish way of looking at things from the Mosaic law, when two people had intercourse, even if they did so sinfully, that act of marriage consummation was considered to be the beginning of a marriage. It was not God's best. It was not God's preferred way, but it was a way for two people to get married. God definitely wanted people to go through the right steps and have a marriage ceremony as described in the Old Testament law. But the reason why God still accepted that act of marriage consummation as the beginning of a marriage was to protect the woman, who was now no longer a virgin. Was to care for her. Once she had lost her virginity, she could be in danger of never being married, and thus destitute for the rest of her life. Unwanted, damaged goods. And Amnon just ignores that. He goes from lust to hatred. Again, it could have been shame. It could have been guilt. It could have been emotional immaturity. Frankly, I'm surprised that Amnon, because he was the firstborn son and heir to the throne, did not murder her and make it seem like an accident. He had to know she was going to tell someone. How about that drama? If that drama seems like it's off the charts, get ready, it's about to skyrocket. In verse 19, the account continues. Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the ornate robe she was wearing. She put her hands on her head and went away, weeping aloud as she went. Her brother Absalom said to her, "Has that Amnon, your brother, been with you?" Now, Absalom is her full brother. They had the same mom, and David was both of their father as well. He continues, "Be quiet for now, my sister. He's your brother. Don't take this thing to heart." And Tamar lived in her brother Absalom's house, a desolate woman. When David heard all this, he was furious. And Absalom never said a word to Amnon, either good or bad. He hated Amnon because he had disgraced his sister Tamar. So word does get out. And yet, did you notice? David is furious, but he doesn't do anything. Think about the stark difference between these two stories that we've read. In chapter 9, when it comes to Mephibosheth, David takes this amazing action to decrease any drama in his life from someone who could have been an enemy. But in chapter 13, when it comes to his own son's terrible sin, he does nothing. David should be decreasing the drama here too. He should be confronting the sin of Amnon. David does nothing. Now let me summarize the rest of the chapter. Absalom bides his time. 2 years go by. We have to wonder. Sounded initially like Absalom was a drama decreaser when he says to his sister, just hold off. But is he really a drama decreaser? Has 2 years given him time to cool down and forgive Amnon? Not even close. Absalom cajoles David to send people to a feast, including Amnon. And David kind of seems like he's suspicious. And he says to Absalom, "Why should Amnon go with you?" But eventually David agrees, but only if all the other brothers go too. It's likely that David is thinking, okay, I'll let Amnon go to this feast with Absalom in a crowd, because then he'll be safe. But it doesn't matter. Right in the middle of the feast, Absalom instructs his men to kill Amnon, and they do it. Think about that act of treason, that act of treachery and sinfulness, where one brother in the royal family kills another one. And of course, when Absalom's men make that move to kill Amnon, the rest of the brothers freak out and flee because they're thinking Absalom is trying to kill everyone because he wants to take the throne. Messengers ride ahead of them and tell David the news. They say that not only is Amnon dead, but that all of the sons are dead. And David is just wrecked. But then that one cousin speaks up. Remember him, Jonadab, who gave Amnon the advice to come up with this little plan to lure Tamar into the room making bread? But this time, Jonadab has good info, true info. It's just facts. He's not trying to do any weaseling or anything. And he just says, whoa, 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 David, wait a minute. Not all the sons are dead. It's just Amnon. But still, Amnon is dead. He's firstborn, the heir to the throne. He's also the rapist. But he's dead. Parents, if you've ever had your children make a terrible decision, you still love that child, don't you? Can imagine how David feels. Yes, his son is the rapist, and that's awful. And now that same son is dead, also awful. I wonder if at these kind of moments, David remembered the words of the prophet Nathan, who said to him, "The sword will never depart from your house." Think about the level of drama that David is faced with in this moment. But there's more. Absalom, having just committed murder, flees to his grandfather in another land called Geshur. And when the rest of the sons actually do reach back to Jerusalem and are with David, there is great weeping and mourning. David, we find out, mourned not only for Amnon, who was dead, but also Absalom, who is now gone. The drama in David's family is intense. We learn that Absalom lives in the country of Geshur for 3 years. And that brings us to chapter 14. I'm going to continue summarizing. Joab, who is David's general, we met him a couple times before, also a bit of a sneaky guy. In chapter 14, Joab essentially tricks David into thinking that enough time has passed that David should let Absalom come back to Jerusalem. And David acquiesces, but only if Absalom is not allowed to have access to the palace and David. And that's what happens. Absalom returns to Jerusalem, but he's kind of on a bit of a house arrest. In 2 Samuel chapter 14, starting in verse 25 to the end of the chapter, we learn that Absalom is not happy about this situation. We learn that people around the land actually really admired Absalom. He was a dashing kind of a character, super handsome. And for 2 years, when he is back in Jerusalem, it appears that though David did not allow Absalom to come and see him, he allowed Absalom a little bit of a leash in the city. Absalom now manipulates Joab, the general, to get an audience with David. He's unsettled. He's restless. He wants to be done with his punishment, even though he was a murderer. David should not give him an audience. Of course, Absalom doesn't see it that way. Absalom thinks that the murder of Amnon was something that David should have authorized. Absalom sees himself as doing the right thing. And so Absalom successfully convinces Joab, and Joab convinces David, and finally, after 5 years, David invites Absalom to the palace and reunites with him. Finally, at the end of chapter 14, it seems like the drama has settled down. Things have not settled down, though, not even close. Continuing on to chapter 15, Absalom is scheming. And he has his sights on the biggest prize, the throne. In verses 1 through 6, Absalom starts acting and talking like a king. He rides a chariot around the city. He hires an entourage of people to walk all around him. He pronounces rulings by the city gate. He says things like, "Where is the king? Or the king's representative? Shouldn't they be here? If I were judge of the land, I would handle this for you." Slowly, Absalom wormed his way into the hearts and minds of the people. 4 more years go by. 4 years of this. And in verses 7 through 12, Absalom comes to his father David and asks permission to go to Hebron, a place of worship, and have a time, a special worship service before the Lord. And David says, of course. But Absalom had ulterior motives. He sent secret messengers all throughout the land of Israel, saying that he was going to Hebron and that they should proclaim that he was now king. That's exactly what happened. And believe it or not, it worked. In verses 13 through 23, David finds out that people from all over start following Absalom. And the only choice David believes he can make at this moment is to flee the city for his life. So through this process, I know I've gone through it very, very quickly, but it's been nearly a 10-year process. Things have changed, and the drama has only amplified. Imagine this. David, the great king, the man after God's own heart, has to flee the city for his life because his son has enacted a military coup. From that point through the end of chapter 15, David leaves the city. But he tells his most loyal advisors to go back. Now, some of them had even brought the Ark of the Covenant to be with David. David says, no, don't do that. Take it back into the city. David wanted these loyal advisors and the ark to almost be like a ruse, making it look like those people were affirming that Absalom was king. And David says this, give him bad advice. Try to bring him down from the inside. This is kind of an internal rebellion that David is trying to set in motion. But don't let David's strategic moves here think you that he's got this all under control, that he's cool, calm, and collected. This situation is horrible. His son is betraying him. Many people in the nation of Israel are betraying him. He has to wonder, will there be war? Is David going to have to go to war with his own family? This is high drama. Look at verse 30, which describes the situation as David is leaving the city. It says, David continued up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered and he was barefoot. All the people with him covered their heads too and were weeping as they went up. This is not regal. This is not royal. David is in the midst of destitution. Now again, remember that verse about the sword not departing from David's house? That prophecy has come true. David's family is a wreck. It seems as though it was easier for David to deflate the drama outside of his family than it is for him to do it inside his family. When there's lust, rape, murder, lies, David is all too quiet. He allows the drama when he should have deflated it. And now it seems all is lost. And we're going to pause the story on that cliffhanger. For now, I want us to think about family drama. We all have it. We're called to be people who deflate the drama. Think about David's sacrificial kindness to Mephibosheth in chapter 9. Mephibosheth, who is David's natural enemy. What does David do? He deflates the drama by sacrificially giving Mephibosheth and his servants a massive gift of land. It would have made Mephibosheth wealthy overnight. He then invites Mephibosheth to have a permanent seat at his dinner table, which would have also made Mephibosheth one of the most powerful men in the country. Also, overnight. If we are to deflate drama in our families, we take intentional steps to address the drama sacrificially, generously. If I'm making this all sound very easy, let me assure you, I know that dealing with drama is complicated. Because typically, when there's family drama, there's a lot of history there. There are emotions. There's people's reputations that are at stake. There is honor. There is shame. There is hurt. There's broken trust. Oftentimes, many, many years of it. It's one thing to be generous with an outsider that you have no relationship with. That's basically David and Mephibosheth. It's a very different thing to deal with drama inside your family, especially when that drama is layered and complex and it's been going on for years. That's David and Absalom. Think about your family drama. Have you given up on it, believing that it's just the way it is, it's never going to change? We often say that about the dramatic ones. That's just the way they are. No hope. They'll always be that way. They've always been that way. So we give up on trying. There comes a time, I will admit, when the most loving thing to do is to say goodbye. When we think about David leaving the city, even to family, sometimes boundaries are needed and good. Especially when the other person is absolutely unwilling to change. It's so hard, especially for Christians, because we have placed our hopes in God, for whom all things are possible, right? With God, there is a true sense in which hope is never lost. And I once heard a Christian business leader talk about love in the workplace, and I think what he said really applies to drama. His workplace drama is similar to family drama. Drama is just drama, right? No matter where you find it, drama is human. So in this business leader's workplace, there was a staff member who brought the drama. Maybe you have that in your workplace. Maybe you know what I mean. In particular, this staff member had poor performance. Her poor performance affected the co-workers' performance. It affected the company as a whole. And when I say affected, I mean it was very negative. But as a Christian leader, this particular boss wanted to invest in his employee's life. He tried and he tried to give training and guidance and help this person see their problem and overcome it. Nothing worked. The staff member continued to be dramatic, and the other employees were getting very restless. But this leader believed that as a Christian, the most loving thing to do was to keep giving this staff member chances, because with God, all things are possible. With God, there is grace. Isn't that how God treats us? Certainly the business leader, he thought to himself, would eventually be able to get through to this person. So shouldn't he keep trying? But years went by and nothing worked. Finally, he decided that love in the workplace needed to be applied not only to the difficult employee, but also to the other staff members who were not problematic. And his decision was to fire the underperforming, dramatic employee, concluding that was the most loving option. And in firing that employee, he deflated the drama. It was a boundary. Difficult, painful. Sometimes boundaries, even in families, are the most loving way to deflate the drama. But maybe your family isn't at a level where it needs boundaries. I don't know. It can be hard to evaluate, but I encourage you, what will it look like to deflate the drama? Don't gossip. Don't text or call or talk behind the person's back. Instead, be a person who, as Paul taught, speak the truth in love. Be a peacemaker, a reconciler, trying to bring two warring parties together. Bring healing to that which is broken, and through it all, demonstrating the fruit of the Spirit. I encourage you to think about what could it look like to walk right up to the drama in the face and say, that's drama. Let's talk about how we can deflate it together. It's not easy, but we can be deflators of drama. in our families.